and all of those other activities in the body. And this is just showing a chick drinking, apparently. And of course, the fluid's going back and forth between the different areas. Okay. So when we look at our basic components, when we look at homeostatic mechanisms, those that are regulating what's going on in our fluids, they're going to monitor changes in the ECF, not the ICF. Okay, so again, we've got those checkpoints, we've got those chemoreceptors, those barioreceptors, again, with the aortic arch and the bifurcation of the carotid arteries to check oxygen levels, CO2 levels, pressure levels within the ECF, within the bloodstream. We've got the hypothalamus that is constantly checking your osmotic concentrations and what's going on there. Now, we're not going to actually be able to check what's going on inside of the cell because, one, that would require a neuron going to every single body cell just to say what that body cell is experiencing, which would increase our neuronal count by too much. And of course, every time one of those cells died or one of those cells divided, that would cause issues with that connectivity. So it's just not feasible to monitor every single individual cell. We just kind of monitor the overall. So it's kind of like in school. It's hard to monitor each individual student, what they're doing 24/7. But if we guesstimate everybody in this classroom is exposed to the same stuff, well, you know, good enough for government work, that kind of scenario. So we don't oftentimes check the ICF, but again, we still can affect it. So if we change the levels in the ECF, that's going to then change the levels in the ICF. So if our neurons aren't functioning properly, maybe we need to bring in more sodium. So we're going to release those hormones that bring in more sodium into the bloodstream, and that in turn will allow more sodium to go into the cell, so it'll change the functionality of those cells. And that's going to work for several of those ions that we've been talking about all along. Now, there's no direct monitoring for those fluid and electrolytes. We don't have sodium receptors. We don't have potassium receptors. We don't have magnesium or chloride receptors. What we do is just monitor solids to liquids. Okay, so again, that hypothalamus is checking the osmotic concentrations. And if we have the right balance of fluid and the right balance of ions, we're going to hope that the ions sort themselves out because of diffusion and all that kind of stuff. So even though we may be monitoring and we have the right fluid and the right ion distribution, we still can have highs or lows because we're allowing them to kind of sort out based on diffusion rates. And if we bring too much of one ion in, it's going to affect another ion, and which is why we can end up with ion imbalances, even though everything else should be working properly. Now, as we talked about within the kidneys, water cannot move by active transport. So again, if we want to move water from one bucket to the other, we have to have a cup in order to do that. Same thing happens within our cells. If we need water, we just can't grab water from the space around and bring it in. We have to entice water to come in using an ion. So if we want to bring water into the cell, we have to bring sodium into the cell so water will trail behind. If we want to get rid of water, we have to sacrifice the sodium to do that. So again, we have to rely on ion distribution to make the water come or go past those membranes to allow for those proper levels. Now, of course, levels are going to rise if we bring in more water than we lose. And of course, our levels are going to fall if we lose more water than we bring in. Now, of course, gains we're looking at through the mouth. Technically, you could gain elsewhere, right? You can get an IV, you can gain fluids that way. That's not normal, but it's possible. You can absorb fluids through backdoor access, but again, nobody drinks water through their anus. That's not normal. So we're going to look at the normal ways that these fluids and ions and stuff are coming in through the mouth. Now, of course, exits, lots of ways, right? We can spit, we can sweat, we can pee, we can poop, we can do all kinds of stuff to get rid of fluids. But typically, when we look at normal, natural ways, water only comes in through the mouth. So when we look at that fluid moves freely within the ECF. It's constantly going on either side of the membranes. We're losing it because of filtration. We're regaining it because of those osmotic pressures. Now, water losses on average is about 2,500 milliliters daily, so 2.5 liters. And of course, we're going to lose some of this as urine. That's obvious because it's liquidy. So we learn, depending on you and your daily activity, 1 to 2 liters of water loss that way. Fecal matter, again, depending on if you have diarrhea today or normal bowel movements, or if you're not pooping today. Insensible perspiration. Insensible perspiration is water loss you can't feel, okay, through your membrane. That's why it's called insensible. We can't feel, we're doing it right now, even though we don't feel it. So water loss from the skin and respiratory tract. So every time we breathe out, we lose a little bit of water. And again, this is something we notice if we try to fog up a window, we can do that because of that moisture within our breath that we're breathing out. The easiest way to see the insensible perspiration in your skin is to put your hands on those cold surfaces in lab, and you'll lift and there's like a little moist handprint. That's water that you lose through your hands. So as we learned in A&P1, thick skin doesn't have oil glands, so it can't have that oil coating like the rest of your body can. So we do tend to lose more fluids through our thick skin than our thin skin, which is why our hands get drier and our feet get drier than the rest of our body. So we have those special hand creams and foot creams to try to lessen the amount of insensible perspiration through those areas. And then, of course, sensible perspiration. You can feel it. You know when you're sweating, okay? You can feel the drips. You can see the drips. Now, when our body temperature goes up, we're going to lose more water. Again, because as our body temperature goes up, our activities go up cell-wise, metabolic activities go up cell-wise, and of course, we may increase the chance that we're losing more moisture through both sensible and insensible perspiration. So on average, for every degree your body temperature goes up, you're going to lose about 200 more milliliters daily, which is why it doesn't matter what kind of illness you have, your doctor and or nurse will always say, drink plenty of fluids, stay hydrated, make sure you're drinking a whole lot during the day. That's because they know if you've got a fever, you're losing more moisture and you don't want to have dehydration, which could affect your body's ability to fight off that pathogen and impede that body's ability to function. So they want to make sure you get hydrated, so drinking lots of fluids. So the average gaining, we're going to get about a liter or 1,000 milliliters through eating. Obviously, this will vary. If you're eating soup, very liquidy, okay? If you're eating bread, not as liquidy, but we do have a lot of moisture in bread. If you don't believe me, let it sit out for a while, right? It becomes a crouton and tries to stab you, right? That's just old dry bread. So depending on what kind of foods we're eating, we have more or less fluid associated with that. You only need about 1,200 milliliters, 1.2 liters daily for drinking. So if you do the conversion between liters and gallons, that's about half of the gallon that most people are trying to drink each day because they bought the myth that you need that much water. The only reason that makes you feel healthier is because you're peeing more. So if you like to pee, want to spend some quality time and some money on toilet paper, then by all means drink a gallon of water a day. But whenever you see people walk around with that gallon, it's not healthier. Actually, it makes more work for the kidneys. Okay, so you don't need that much water. The only reason people get healthy, lose weight on that much water is because if your stomach is full of water, you can't eat. And water has no calories. So magically, you're going to lose weight because your stomach is full of water and you can't absorb anything and process anything. And then you pee all the time. So anytime you watch, those people drive me nuts when they got their gallon up and you're like, wow, you're an idiot. You need to take a biology class. All right, so those people. And then, of course, metabolic water. As we learned at the end of the ETS cycle, we're going to combine hydrogen to oxygen, which is why we need oxygen. And by combining it to hydrogen neutralizes the acidity of that hydrogen. And, of course, when you add a couple of hydrogens to oxygen, you get water. So every time we break down something, carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins, we're going to get some metabolic water. Average human metabolic water is about 300 milliliters. So we're not very efficient at doing this. Other animals, very efficient. So the desert kangaroo rat over in Arizona, they don't have to drink at all because they generate all the water they need from metabolic processing. So they're very, very efficient. Us, on the other hand, we still got to drink something. Basically, if you look at the ATP production, that's roughly going to let you know the percentage of water. The more ATP we produce by breaking down a molecule, the more water we produce by breaking down the molecule. So again, lipids give us the most ATP when we break them down. So for every gram of a lipid you break down, you're going to get 1.7 milliliters. For every gram of protein, 0.41, and for every gram of carbs, 0.55 milliliters. So again, the best is this energy source gives us the most water. The worst energy source gives us the least amount of water. So here's this chick. So she's drinking more water because she's not eating as much food. So you do have to balances again. And obviously she's not metabolizing very much. You know, she should do something with her life. So this is her ins and here's her outs. Fortunately, they did not draw the fecal matter part, but they drew everything else. Yay, small miracles, right? All right. So there she is breathing out because why not? And then she's all sweaty inside, and then she's making a lot of pee. Okay, so the ins to balance your outs. Okay. Overhydration, underhydration. So again, if you have too much or too little water, it can be problematic. Now, we don't see too much water very often unless you get stupid people together. So unfortunately, back in the day when the Wii first came out, there was a radio station that did a water drinking contest, a Wii for a Wii. So whoever drank the water was supposed to win a Wii because drinking alcohol was irresponsible. Right? But unfortunately, during this time, the person who drank the most water died. And then the runner-up got the Wii, and everyone lost their jobs. Okay? So, and then the most depressing thing about that is it was long enough ago that it's now an example in your textbook. Wow. I know, a little bit of depression when you're like, wow, I'm old enough to have experienced the stuff that's in your textbook. Oh, sadness. So if you remember that one happening, you're old too. All right, so again, too much is not a good thing. And unfortunately, this does pop up a whole lot. There was a case not long after that where a little girl died because the babysitter would use water drinking as a punishment because it was safe that way. So the little girl was forced to drink too much water and she ended up dying of overhydration. So, that went to jail. So it's one of those things you have to make sure your ins balance your outs. You don't want to get too much because that's going to cause major problems. So excessive water ends up causing hyponatremia. It dilutes you, just like having too much ice dilutes your iced tea, and then you have to get new iced tea. So if you dilute your ions, your cells aren't going to be able to function properly. So a big sign of that is hyponatremia, not enough sodium, not enough salty enough. You need to bring that in. So of course this can happen because you ingest too much water, you're drinking too much, or an infusion, which is why when you're on an IV, it's called an IV drip, not an IV pour. They have to make sure the drip is at the right level because if they give it too high, unfortunately, it can cause overhydration quite quickly and can cause problems with your patient. And this is something you have to be very careful of because if a patient comes in with dehydration, yes, they need water to bring them back up before they go to circulatory shock, but you don't want to give them water too quickly because you can actually go from being underhydrated to overhydrated very fast. And that's actually what happens to a lot of hikers. A lot of hikers will get out there and think, oh, I feel really bad because I'm dehydrated. I'm going to chug water to feel better. And it kicks them right over into overhydration and they have to go to the hospital because they got too much water in the system because they chugged too much right after their hike or right after thinking that they were dehydrated. So you do have to be careful when you're coming out of a dehydrated state not to overdo it because you don't want to swing wildly from one side to the next. Yes, ma'am.
Would that still happen if they drink like that electrolyte water or Gatorade or something like that? Because that has other.
The waters that have electrolytes, it will slow the overhydration because it's going to pull it in, but you can still overhydrate on that just as easily. Now, we can also have issues if the body is unable to get rid of it. So if you can't urinate, if you can't pull off the excess fluid because of a kidney problem, and this is why we do dialysis, it's not just to get rid of the waste that our body produces, but it's also to get rid of that excess water that we need to do to eliminate. Endocrine disorders, whether it's problem with ADH or aldosterone or any of those renins and hormones that we talked about with the kidneys, imbalance with those can cause an imbalance with fluids. So all this can lead to what we call as water intoxication. What happens is the neurons will absorb excess water and they'll start to swell. And swollen brains are not good for you, right? Right. They can be fatal because the brain expands out and crushes itself against the skull. So in the beginning stages, the neurons are misfiring because they're so swollen, and that causes behavior similar to if you were drunk. So you can get drunk off of too much water. It's just a cheap way to do it, but you're like drunk right before you're dead, so it's not worth it. Everyone's thinking, how can I save water at the party? No, don't do it. So again, you act drunk, you get very confused, you have hallucinations, you go into convulsions, you go into a coma, and you die. This is oftentimes what is the leading cause of death from taking ecstasy. When you take ecstasy, because it's interfering with your neurotransmitters, making you feel happy, unfortunately, it also makes you feel very thirsty. So you start chugging water, which causes that overhydration. So most people who die from ecstasy overdose, it's not the pill that's causing the problem. It's the fact that they drink like a fish right afterwards, like a saltwater fish, not a freshwater fish. They actually drink differently. You don't care. I do. But it's one of those things that they chug water a whole lot. So you do have to be careful, causes that problem. Treatment, give them some salt, make them salty. So we're going to give them IV salt solution. We're also giving diuretics to make them pee a whole lot. Okay? And again, this is why we have a lot of patients often complain when they have high blood pressure. They're like, I don't know, but that medication they gave me makes me pee all the time. It's like, yeah, it's getting rid of the fluid. And if we have less fluid, we have less pressure. Dehydration, obviously the opposite of overhydration. So we don't have enough fluids. So the volume or water gets depleted. Our symptoms, hypernatremia, too much sodium. We get a little too salty, a little too concentrated. And of course, if we drop 30% of fluids, we can go into circulatory shock and have the problems with that. So the treatment, again, give them fluids, give them IV. And of course, going along with the protein waters and the electrolyte water, stuff like that. This is why whenever you hike, they tell you don't just take water. What do they often tell you to take along with you other than water? Trail mix. That's the reason why it's called trail mix. If you've noticed, it's usually salty stuff like some peanuts and some random M&Ms and odd things that go together. I can't do trail mix. I can't eat an M&M with a random peanut. I know it's weird because peanut M&Ms are a thing, but when they're separate, it's just dirty. Oh, I don't eat rotten grapes. Gross. Okay. If they even start to look wrinkly, the grapes go to the chickens. It's like, I ain't eating this. I got standards. I'm not going to eat old grapes. So it's one of those things when you eat the trail mix, it's usually very salty. So while you're eating that food and drinking that fluid, you are absorbing ions, you're absorbing sodiums and other things while you're absorbing that water. So again, this is why trail mix is important to have some snacking while you're walking, while you're drinking, or have the waters that have the stuff already built in. You'll see a lot of sports people, and instead of Gatorade, they'll just put plain just salt in their water. Okay, and that's going to help them balance their ions while balancing their fluids. All right, fluid shifting. How is it going to go back and forth? And again, we look at osmosis. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration. Osmosis is the movement of water from high concentrations to low concentrations. And we're talking about high concentrations of water to low concentrations of water. So when we look at osmosis, we often use big terms that you might see if you've taken chemistry. So osmolarity, that's the total solute concentration. So how much stuff is in your water? It's similar to whenever they ask you, do you want sweet tea or unsweet tea, right? I want very high osmolarity with my sweet tea, right? I want sugar, lots and lots of sugar, okay? The low osmolarity would be the unsweet tea, which is just brown water. What's the point, really, right? So we look at two different terms. We have hypotonic versus hypertonic. There is also a third term, which is isotonic. Iso means equal. Now, if we ever become isotonic, we're dead. Because if we're equal on either side of the membranes, that's death. Okay, so we don't want that one. So when we look at hypo versus hyper, if we have a hypotonic solution, you're going to have that cell, and that means that cell is going to be in a solution that has a lower osmolarity. So the hypotonic, hypoosmolarity. So what happens when we place cells in a hypotonic solution? Again, the water wants to dilute. So that water is going to rush into the cell, okay? And that is going to cause that cell to start to swell up and eventually it'll burst and blow up. This is what will happen if you put Nemo in a freshwater tank. Not that you're going to do that because saltwater fish are very expensive and nobody wants to spend $50 to watch a fish pop. And it's not even visual from the, you have to have a microscope and you'll see their cells exploding, but you won't actually see the fish explode. So no perks. Okay. But this is why, again, if you have saltwater fish, you're always monitoring and managing the concentrations of the water because if those concentrations get off, your fish will die because they'll explode at the cell level. Freshwater, if we put an ocean water fish into it. Hypertonic solution. Wow, I just started with the P. Hypertonic solution. Give me a minute, I gotta make it hypertonic. So again, the hypertonic solution is going to have the higher osmolarity. So sweet tea would be hypertonic, regular tea would be hypotonic. So what happens, water will leave the cell to dilute the area around the outside, and that will cause that cell to start shriveling up and start shrinking away. This is something we actually notice. One, if you live in very dry climates, you tend to wrinkle more. Look at pictures of, before the Botox and stuff happened. When you look at pictures from people who lived in deserty regions, they look like little raisins, right? They're very, lots of lines. When you look at people who were in moist areas like Florida, not as many wrinkles. That is because they lose a lot of that moisture to the environment. So you get that issue body-wise as well as within the cells. So this is what would happen if you put a goldfish in the ocean. Okay, they would dehydrate. They would lose all their fluids to the surrounding water, trying to dilute the surrounding water. So this is something that we have to monitor. This is why, one, we don't drink seawater. First and foremost, do you know what fish do in the ocein?
Pee-pee and poo-poo.
Yeah, they everything. They live, they die, they release lots of sperms and eggs into the water. So when you swallow seawater, there's poop and pee and bits of dead things and living organisms and who knows, little corals that are trying to live. Your stomach will kill them all. It's okay. But if you drink salt water obviously is saltier than you. This is what's going to happen. If you have that salt water in your gut, you would lose water to your gut to dilute out the water. Okay, so this is what happens if you drink seawater. That's why they tell you don't do it, because it's going to cause dehydration. It's going to cause severe diarrhea, which is not good if you're stuck on a raft because that's going to be a mess. So you're going to lose lots and lots of water that way. So if you were to drink ocean water, not the good stuff from Sonic, but like from the ocean, it takes about 2 weeks to cause dehydration. So you'll have diarrhea till you die. Not very pleasant. So you don't want to do that.
How much water would you have to drink?
2 weeks worth.
Oh,
So
but you meant I would have diarrhea for 2 weeks.
well, you would, but you don't live very long if you're stuck on a raft. So it's better to drink your own pee, but only for the first 7 times, and then you're way too concentrated. Don't do it either. Okay? Just say no. Don't go on the ocean.
Just say no.
Then you'll be fine. Okay, so that's the problem that way. This is also why you have to be careful of what you consume when you're not feeling good. So if you have diarrhea, a lot of people, we hear Pedialyte. Take Pedialyte. Pedialyte actually has the same ionic concentration as you. Okay, so it's isotonic. So when you drink Pedialyte, it's not going to pull water from your system. It's going to allow you to absorb water efficiently. If you drink something like Gatorade actually has a higher osmolarity than you do. So Gatorade would be hypertonic, you would be hypotonic, so you would lose water to your Gatorade. So if you have diarrhea, drinking Gatorade will just make your diarrhea worse. Okay, so it's not going to help hydrate you, it's going to make it worse on you. It would be better to drink Pedialyte or even water because that's going to allow that fluid shift more efficiently and to slow down the diarrhea issues. Okay, so the only time Gatorade is good for you is if you're actively sweating, losing ions and water. Then you need to replace ions and water. But if you're not losing those ions, there's no need to have those ions in your drink. So it's not actually healthy for you. It's just Kool-Aid with salt. So if you're going to do that, might as well just drink Kool-Aid. At least it tastes good. Okay? So Gatorade, you got to be careful with because it can cause health issues if you are in a risk of losing that water because of something like diarrhea. Oh, there's some fluid. So we're using these little yellow balls or kind of orangey balls. They can't cross the membrane, so they're going to act as the heavy. So no matter how much water comes or goes, they can't leave that side of the membrane. This is what we use urea as. So this is why we reclaim half of the urea that we filter out because we're going to use urea as a heavy. We're going to use it to help draw water and balance water. So if we have these two, these have more orange than this side, so the water's going to come over here to try to dilute out these little guys. So you end up with more water over here, less water over here. So if you had, your sweet tea next to your unsweet tea, you're going to dilute that out because that water is going to cross the membrane. Or the ice melting in your sweet tea is going to dilute out and cause those issues. So this is why you have problems with ice melting and all that stuff, water too. Now, obviously, electrolytes are important because of 2 reasons. One, they affect cell functionality, sodium, potassium, calcium. We saw how too much, too little can cause issues with the nervous tissue, can cause issues with the muscle systems in A&P1. And of course, we've seen how it can cause issues with blood clotting and functionalities in A&P2. So we need to have the right ion distribution so the cells do what they're supposed to do. And of course, we're going to use those ions to manipulate water levels. So if our ions are off, usually our water gets off, and that's going to cause that health concern. And as you've probably figured out by now, because we've been talking about these two all throughout A&P2, and of course through about half of A&P1, sodium and potassium are kind of a big deal. Okay, so these are the ones that we watch for and manipulate because they're going to cause problems a little bit quicker than the other guys. We're going to look at the top 6. Okay, the top 6, 3 of them are more important in the ECF, 3 of them are more important in the ICF. So these are the ones that we have the highest concentrations of and can do the most issues if we get an imbalance. So we'll just start the ball rolling with sodium. And again, sodium is Na on the chemistry chart back there. So anytime we gain a sodium, we will also gain water, which is why you can't pre-salt your beef by feeding your cow salt and barbecue sauce. That would be great if you could be like, here, eat this, it'll taste delicious. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so every time we bring in sodium, we're going to bring in water. And again, this is why we have sodium restricted diets whenever we have high blood pressure and heart problems. It's not the sodium that's causing the problem, it's the water. And you have sometimes stupid people. If you told patients that, well, if you have less water, you would have less blood, so your blood pressure would go down. There'd be some idiot who would die of dehydration because they would be like, my doctor says I need less water to lower my blood pressure. Okay, so we don't want to tell patients to drink less water because then you'll have stupid people not drink it all and die. Gets rid of the stupid people, but then there's like a lawsuit or something. So that's why we tell them to restrict the sodium. Okay, by restricting the sodium, it thus restricts the water that we bring back in. Now, hypernatremia, so the terms use the long versions of the periodic table, so Na natremia. So hypernatremia, too much salt, we, again, is when we have too much salt because we're too concentrated. So they all kind of run together. So we get real thirsty because we don't have enough water because we have too much sodium. We get dryness and wrinkling of the skin. So people, again, who are chronically dehydrated or don't drink enough tend to wrinkle more frequently. Again, deserty people versus, tropical foresty kind of people. And of course, if we get too little sodium, too little fluids, we end up with that circulatory shock. Hyponatremia, too little salties, we're too diluted, we get water intoxication. So it's kind of hard to separate the water issues from the sodium issues because they are reflecting of each other because they always hang out. The sodiums and the waters always move in unison. Sodium more important in the ECF, in the external stuff. Potassium, most of it's in the ICF inside of our cells. So again, we learned back in A&P1, in a resting state, our neuron has more sodium on the outside, more potassium on the inside. And we see that in the muscles. We see that in a lot of the body systems. Sodium's on the outside, potassium's on the inside. And we have to regain it every time it diffuses out so we can stay at rest. So again, the sodium-potassium pump is going to help us maintain the imbalance. We will lose potassium anytime we gain a sodium. They don't like each other. They're kind of like exes, right? If you want to make sure this person doesn't want to go to your party, you invite their ex, and then that person won't show up. Or if they're there, the ex shows up with this new hussy water, and like, oh, I'm out. Potassium leaves, takes hydrogen with him. Let's go, bestie. So anytime the sodium comes in, the potassium's going to go out. So if we need to get rid of potassium, we just gain a sodium. If we need to gain a potassium, we need to get rid of the sodium. So by manipulating sodium levels, we thus indirectly manipulate potassium levels. This is the most dangerous of the electrolyte imbalances because it directly affects how neurons and muscles are working. Okay, it's going to be a big player in that. Hyperkalemia, again, potassium on the periodic table is a K, so it's hyperkalemia. Too much, you get severe cardiac arrhythmias. As we saw with that chart back on 710, if we have too much potassium, the potassium can't leave the heart muscle properly. We're not going to repolarize like we're supposed to, which can cause the heart to have arrhythmias and eventually stop. And again, this is why you give them a shot of potassium chloride to kill inmates or dogs or anything like that, to euthanize them, because it's going to cause that inability for the muscle cells to repolarize, so the cardiac muscle will stop. It does the same thing to the neurons. It slows repolarization, so it takes longer for neurons to fire, which is why you kind of pass out before you die, because those neurons aren't functioning like they're supposed to. If you get too much, not enough to kill you, but just too much in general, you can also get acidosis because hydrogen always follows potassium. So if we have high levels of potassium, we tend to have high levels of hydrogen, and hydrogens are very acidic. So a lot of times we will sacrifice potassium to get rid of hydrogen if we need to maintain the proper acidity levels. Hypokalemia, not enough, we get muscle weakness and paralysis. One, because the neurons can't fire like they're supposed to, stimulating the muscles. They're not able to release enough neurotransmitters. And then, of course, with the muscles not having enough potassium, they can't receive and respond to those neurotransmitters. So you get a lot of muscle weakness, paralysis with hypokalemia. And you can also get alkalosis, because if you don't have enough potassiums, you don't have enough hydrogens, you're going to have too much base, too high of alkalinity. Calcium. This is the most abundant mineral in the human body, but it doesn't play a huge role because 99% is stored in your bones. So most of it we can't use. We will operate on the 1%. But again, that 1% is still important. So again, A&P1, we learned that calcium is that final trigger for muscle contraction. Whether it's skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, or heart muscle, calcium is a major player. So not having enough is going to cause muscle weakness across any of the muscles in the body. We also learned in A&P1, calcium has to come in before we can open up and release neurotransmitters for communication with those neurons. So if we don't have enough calcium, we can't release enough neurotransmitters. That's what we learned GABA did for us, is shut down calcium channels so we can relieve anxiety and so forth that we learned back in A&P1. And then, of course, in A&P2, we know calcium was also important, not just with smooth and cardiac muscles, but also with blood clotting. We have to have it at several points in both the intrinsic and extrinsic pathways to have proper clotting. Now, obviously, clotting disorders is the least of your worries when you have neurological problems and muscle problems, but those are all going to make you have a pretty bad day. Okay. So too much hypercalcemia, you get confusion because, again, we release too much neurotransmitters, react with those neurons. We get muscle pain because the muscles overcontract and don't relax properly. We can get those cardiac arrhythmias. Again, the calcium is the only one that can speed up heart rate slightly. You're not going to just sit there and take it. You'll try to get rid of the excess calcium, so you'll urinate out kidney stones. So some people will have a lot of kidney stones as their symptom of having too much calcium. And you can start having calcification of your soft tissues. Your body needs to get rid of the calcium, and if you can't pee it out in high enough amounts, you're going to start storing it in soft tissues so it doesn't bother you anymore. And of course, we don't want calcification of soft tissues because they're supposed to be soft. So it's going to affect their functionality. You can also get alkalosis, okay, too basic. When you look at calciums tend to neutralize acids. When you eat Tums for stomach acid issues and heartburn, Tums is almost pure calcium. That's why it tastes so chalky. So basically that calcium is working to neutralize the acidity across your body. And if you have too much, it over neutralizes you. So you get a little bit of alkalosis. Hypocalcemia, not enough. Again, you get muscle spasms that can lead to convulsions because the muscles try to hoard the calcium, so they don't want to let it go. We also see cardiac arrhythmias, smooth muscle arrhythmias, because we're not able to contract those guys like we're supposed to. So that's where you get the weak heartbeats and the arrhythmias and intestinal cramping. Again, your body's not going to sit there and take it. They're going to try to release calcium from the blood into the bloodstream from the skeleton. So you can get osteoporosis as we're trying to liquidate, literally, to get the calcium into the system, neurological problems, and of course, acidosis. Not enough calcium, so we're not able to neutralize some of the acids that are floating about. And calcium is mostly in the ECF. Okay. Magnesium, 60% is stored in your bones, so we're running on a little bit less than half of our count. It's found more in the cell than out of the cell, so more in the ICF than the ECF. So hypermagnesemia, these words just get funnier and bigger. So too much, you get confusion, you get lethargy, so you're tired and confused. I know it just sounds like a weeknight, but it's more than that. Respiratory depression, hypotension, so very low blood pressure, very low breathing rates, which can lead to low oxygen levels, and that can continue to contribute to the lethargy and the confusion the patient is experiencing. Hypomagnesemia, too little, we actually pair that with hypocalcemia. So if you know you're low on one, you're probably also low on the other. So they're going to do a panel and check for everything. So we get muscle weakness, cramping, cardiac arrhythmias, hypertension. That high blood pressure is because the smooth muscle is trying to hoard the calciums because we're getting low on calciums and low on magnesiums, and that can cause that high blood pressure issues. Phosphate, again, a lot of it is also stored in the bones, most important for the ICF. So potassium, phosphate, and magnesium, your PMPs, are all going to be inside of the cells. So your sodium, your calcium, and your chloride are outside of the cells. Okay, so the P's like to be on the inside, and the C's like to be on the outside. Okay. So if you have too much phosphate, you get hyperphosphatemia. It sounds like a country in the Middle East somewhere, but I'm sure there's lots of sand. So too much phosphate, there's no immediate symptoms because it's not going to cause a lot of problems until it's too late. And over time, it causes calcification of soft tissues. Okay, so you don't just wake up one day and you're crunchy, but you do get scans like, oh, you got patches. We got to see why you've got patches of calcified tissue. Hypophosphatemia, not enough, you get anorexia. So this is one of those things. When we think of anorexia, we often think of somebody that has poor body image and they think they're fat so they don't eat, right? So most people are like, oh, give that girl some therapy and a cheeseburger. That'll make it better. It's like, you're so pretty, eat a burger. We need to tell that to the cast of Oz, right? Not the pretty part because they're just scary nowadays, but they need to eat some food. Maybe they have a phosphate problem. I think they have a Hollywood problem. They just be. But again, this is why when somebody has anorexia, it's not always a mental disorder. It's not just you need psychoanalytical therapies and good self-esteem, that scenario. It might actually be an ion imbalance. So they always do blood work when there is anorexic issues because it could also be a problem with the ion distribution in the body. So if they fix the ions, the patient might feel hungry again and might fix the anorexic issues. So sometimes it's medical, sometimes it's psychological. You get dizziness, you get muscle weakness and osteoporosis, which is not good because if you're skinny, dizzy, weak, and fragile, you're going to break something. And then, of course, cardiomyopathy is where that heart becomes very baggy, very flabby, and doesn't contract like it's supposed to. So again, not a good thing to have altogether. And then chloride. Chloride is more abundant in the ECF. So again, your chloride, your calcium, and your sodium like to hang out in the bloodstream. Hyperchloremia, too much, you get acidosis, so you become too acidic, and you often can have hyperkalemia. So if you have a problem with your chloride, they're immediately going to check your phosphate levels to make sure they're not reaching high points that could be fatal. Hypochloremia, not enough, causes alkalosis. It also causes anorexia. So anorexia could be the result of two ion imbalances, muscle cramping and apathy. So you're skinny, crampy, and just don't care. So apathy can usually, we all associate that with an emotional disorder, like, maybe you're a serial killer, but it could also be because you don't have enough chloride. Put some salt on stuff, that'll help you out a little bit. Questions about ions? All right. Shifting gears to acids and bases, which we've been hinting at for a while. Again, when we look at the pH scale, 1 to 14, 7 is in the very middle, 7 is neutral, 7 is water, neither acidic or basic. 1 to 7, so everything below 7 is going to be acidic. If we are acidic, we tend to release hydrogen ions. So anytime something releases hydrogen ions, you automatically know it has to be an acid. Now, if we're above 7, so 7 to 14, we're going to be a base. And when bases release, they release hydroxide ions. Okay, so if we see anything releasing a hydroxide ion, we automatically know, bless you, that it's an alkaline, that it's a base. Now, if you were to add an equal acid to an equal base, what do you end up with? If you added a 6 acid and an 8 base together, what would you end up with?
6 acid and 8 base.
Yeah, so if they're equal. We add an acid to a base together and they're equal in their acidity and alkalinity. What do you end up with? They neutralize. What do they produce? If you add a hydrogen to a hydroxide, what do you get?
Hydrogen oxide.
Not hydrogen oxide, but H plus hydroxide. No.
Hydrogen plus
Plus hydroxide. It's looking at you.
Oh.
Strong acid.
Well, we're having a bad day, aren't we?
Water.
Water.
Oh.
Hydrogen plus a hydroxide, H plus OH gives you
H2O.
H2O.
Oh my God.
Chemistry, yay.
Good
So,
grief.
curse you, chemistry. So it wouldn't be a hydrogen oxide, it would be a dihydrogen oxide, which is the chemical name for water. And again, this is why an equal acid and an equal base neutralize each other. They turn into water. Okay, so completely neutralizes, giving us some water. Okay. Now, a strong acid or a strong base will disassociate completely in solution. Basically, it means makes lots of bubbles, okay? And the more bubbles we release, the stronger the acid we are looking at. So if we are a strong acid, we're going to release tons and tons of hydrogen bubbles. Think of hydrogen chloride. So if you've ever played that with that in the lab, you put it on something and it bubbles and hisses and melts everything. That's because it's a very strong acid. Similar to xenomorph blood if you've watched any of your movies.
Xenomorph. The
Aliens. That's what they're called, is a xenomorph. Different shape, actually foreign shape, but that's okay. Oh, you guys need to watch some more. There's a new Predator movie coming out. He looks so much tamer than he did in the 80s. Like 80s was terrifying. This one looks like you could just punch him in the face and be okay with it.
Is it the one on the island?
I don't know. It's good. It's called Badlands. Yep, y'all need more scary movie time. I know life is really scary because I'm here. But to replace me when I'm gone, when you, not because I'm dead, because you're not in my class anymore, watch a scary movie. That'll give you that adrenaline rush. But again, if you watch the Aliens movie, the aliens have acidic blood. Eats through stuff, lots of bubbling, lots of heat seeing and stuff like that. That's a strong acid. A strong base releases lots of hydroxide. This is why you don't put your face over Drano when you use it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Drano is a very big base. Okay? It's basically hydrochloric acid in alkaline form. So it releases lots of hydroxide bubbles. And of course, being a strong base, it eats away at organic material, which is why you use it to clear your drains, because the odds are what's clogging your drain is your hair or grease, whether it's your grease or your, lunch grease, that kind of scenario. So it eats through organic material, which is why you don't use Drano on your face. You technically could use hydrochloric acid, but again, nobody sells that at stores because it causes a lot of damage, and people are stupid. Yeah, that's why we shouldn't sell a lot of stuff at stores. So those guys are if you were to add hydrochloric acid to Drano, don't do that at home. You got to be skilled to do it. But if you added it just right, you'd get water. Nobody would want to drink it, but you'd get water out of it because they are about equal on the scales. Okay? A weak acid or a weak base, they don't disassociate completely. There's some bubbles, but not a lot. Okay? So some of those acids stay in solution. Some of them we like to stay in solution. Carbon dioxide in its in solution form is carbonic acid, which is the same deliciousness that gives us our sparkling waters and our Coca-Colas and stuff like that. They put carbonic acid in the water. That's why it's called carbonated water. The bubbles are the CO2 once it comes out of solution. It doesn't bubble to the point it disappears, but it does bubble a little bit. And that's why it's a little acidic. It's a weak acid, not a very strong acid. So as we've been hinting at, and if you should know by now, in the ECF, normal pH is 7.35 to 7.45. We are slightly alkaline. We're a little bit basic. So below 6.8, you die. Above 7.7, you die. Now, if you're between 7.35 and 6.8, you have acidemia. So you're below the normal acid range that we are allowed. The physiological state is termed acidosis. So acidemia is technically the disease, but all the symptoms are acidosis. So a lot of times we just talk about it from acidosis point of view, because that's what's affecting the body. That's what's changing the functionality of the body. If we're above 7.45 up to 7.7, we don't got as much room on that end of the scale. We have alkalemia, and again, the physiological state is called alkalosis. How is it changing how our bodies function? How is it changing how our bodies work? The reason why we have to have the right pH, because pH will denature enzymes. It will change the consistency of proteins and enzymes, and if they don't work, you don't work. So you have to have the right acid levels. And this is something you can, test if you want to at home. If you've ever eaten ceviche, right? It's raw fish and acid. So it might be lemon juice, it might be lime juice, you might be fancy, make it grapefruit juice, whatever makes your ceviche. But when you add that to the fish, you'll notice the fish changes color, it changes texture, it tastes completely different because that acid is breaking apart those protein bonds, denaturing those proteins. And that much acid or that much base would do the same thing to your body. It would change it, just like if you got too hot, it would cook the egg white material, the albumin in your blood, causing it to be blood sausage. So changing in heat, changing a pH, changes textures and functionality of proteins. And we don't want to cook, whether we're cooking because of acidity levels or cooking because of heat. It's not going to be good for us, right? Right, cooking is not good for living things. Tends to kill you. Here's an artist who enjoyed their job a little too much. They drew a pH scale. All right, so here's our normal pH at happy 7.35 to 7.45. Little bit under is acidosis, little bit over is alkalosis, too much, and you die. So we don't want death. Death is bad for patients. We want to keep them alive. We keep them when they're happy. So types of acids in the body. In chemistry land, there's lots of different acids, but in the human body, we only have 3 different types of categories. So each of the acids you might experience fall underneath one of these. So our first ones are volatile acids. Volatile acids, poof, okay? They're volatile, kind of like a bomb is volatile. It explodes. So they poof. So they're going to leave solution and enter the atmosphere at the drop of a hat. If they're exposed, they're gone. The classic example, carbonic acid. So while in solution, your carbonic acid, your carbon dioxide floats around in your bloodstream. You expose it to the respiratory membrane and it poofs into the air of the alveolar sacs and you can breathe it out. As it poofs, not only is it going to take itself out of the solution, releasing carbon dioxide, but it also releases a little bit of water. So this is something, again, you might notice when you drink Coca-Cola. Of course, when you have an unopened bottle, so it's sealed, there's a vacuum in there, there's no air, which is why you can shake up a sealed Coke and it doesn't do anything for you. When you open it, it fizzes and all that bubbles leaves, that's the carbon dioxide. Even if you don't see big violent bubbles, you can actually see the volcano of carbon dioxide leaving the Coke solution. Anybody ever just watch the bottle, let it kind of breathe out? It's kind of fun. If you were to sniff that, it feels fun because you just got a big whiff of carbon dioxide. So again, it's going to leave. If you watch the Coke long enough, as those bubbles leave, you'll notice you'll get that film of water at the top, that little clear band. And that's because as that carbon dioxide is leaving, it leaves a little bit of water behind. Bless you. Bless you. Carbon dioxide does that. So as we leave that water, this is why your Coke goes flat. You've lost all that carbonic acid. And when it goes flat, it tastes kind of that weird watered down taste. Weird watered down, sweetie kind of taste is because one, it leaves a lot of that water behind. And carbonic acid is acidic, is sour. All acids are sour. So if you've ever had the Coke at the wrong mix and you just get after the syrup leaves and it's just the carbon dioxide water, like, it makes you twitch. Change the Coke. Okay. The Coke syrup is super sweet to balance this sour that is coming from that acid. So if you don't have the right balance, your Coke will either be too sweet or too sour, which is why some people don't like certain people's Cokes, right? We're looking at Subway. Subway cannot mix a Coke to save their life, right? Their Cokes always taste off. Okay. So you got to have that right mix, and that's the mix you happen to like because it balances the sours and the sweets, the syrups, and the carbonic acid. Fixed acids don't poof. They don't leave solution. So if you have a fixed acid sit in a bowl, it's just going to sit there and look at you. It's fixed in that liquid state. So in order to get rid of it, we got to get rid of it at the kidney. So we can't breathe out the acid. We have to pee out the acid. Examples, sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid. These are usually from breakdown. So anytime we break down amino acids, again, we are going to release a lot of acidity, things like ammonia, that fun stuff. Anything that contains a phosphate, so the phospholipids, nucleic acids, that's going to give us the phosphoric acid. Sulfuric acid is also associated with proteins. Think of egg yolks, right? They taste very sulfurous. And you get nasty egg yolk burps. That's because there's a lot of protein. Actually, eggs are all protein, but that yolk has extra good protein because that's the lunch for the baby chicken if it was going to be a baby chicken. Okay. And then organic acid. It's organic. Okay. Organic just means made by humans or living things. Okay, so that's all organic means. So they are participants in or byproducts of aerobic metabolism, things you make because you do stuff. So lactic acid. that one is organic because, of course, if we don't get that pyruvic acid in the mitochondria with oxygen in time, it degrades into lactic acid. Keto bodies, we break down fatty acids, and when we break down that fatty acids, if we're not able to utilize it efficiently, we're going to convert that into a keto body, a little less acidic. It's still acidic, but not as scary as just straight on fatty acid. And again, this is what they check for when you have ketoacidosis, or if you're purposely are on the keto diet in making your body go into ketoacidosis state. You have too much organic acids from breaking down too much fat. Now, for most people, they metabolize quick enough that they don't cause problems. Now, they can cause local problems, right? Your muscles might be sore for a few days after you exercise because of that lactic acid buildup. That acidity changed to your muscles, changed how they function. That's why they're sore. That's why they're tired until you can get rid of that acid that has built up. Okay, so most of the time, it's not going to kill you. You're going to work it through the system, hopefully. Okay, so those are our 3 acid types that we have. So buffers. Buffers are how we protect us against those acids that we produce. Because again, metabolically, everything we make is acidic. We break down sugars into pyruvic acid, and if we don't get the oxygen, it becomes lactic acid. We break down triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol, and those fatty acids become those keto bodies. We break down protein into amino acids, and that releases things like ammonia. So everything we do makes an acid. Even the ETS releases hydrogens, acids. So we have to neutralize as much as we can and buffer as much as we can so we don't have acidosis happening too quickly. So buffers are just dissolved compounds that will remove a hydrogen or provide a hydrogen to stabilize the pH levels. So they're going to act as little weak acids or little weak bases that bind to acid for us or bind to a hydrogen for us. So like we talked about when we have ammonium and ammonia, you have NH3 as the byproduct of breaking down amino acids. At normal pH, NH3 becomes NH4. We are using that acid as a buffer because it's a weak acid to grab a hold of that extra hydrogen so we can eliminate it from the body more efficiently. So our different types of buffers. Our first ones are protein buffers. This is where we're going to use a protein to buffer. It's going to bind to that excess hydrogen for us. So it helps regulate pH in the ECF and the ICF in the cells and out of the cells. And it relies on amino acids. Again, amino acids are weak acids. They are acidic, and they can combine to that hydrogen to help buffer for us. And again, any protein can do this. 3/4 of all of your buffers are protein buffers because we have to be made out of protein. We're really good at that. So in the ECF, plasma proteins, we talked about how albumin binds to free fatty acids, binds to it while we exercise. That lactic acid will bind to those collagen fibers until it can bind to albumin and be shipped off to the liver during the Cori cycle for repurposing. Any dissolved amino acids can also bind to those hydrogens as they go through the system. Inside of the cell, we've got structural proteins. So this can be the different types of, maybe it's in the muscles and it's myosin and actin combined with lactic acid, which what makes them tired because they can't do their normal sliding filament theory because stuff's bound to them. Other proteins within the cell, we're going to use those to manipulate, hold on to those guys. So any protein, hemoglobin can bind to carbon dioxide. So hemoglobin can act as a buffer while we have carbon dioxide in the system. Okay, so we're utilizing any and all things on board protein-wise to buffer for us. Now, of course, the ECF, ICF exchange back and forth. So again, your skeletal muscles are exercising, you're not getting enough oxygen, you make lactic acid. That lactic acid is going to diffuse out of the muscle cell and bind to albumin and be shipped off to the liver for processing, bind to collagen fibers waiting for the shipment to happen. So that may take a couple of days for the Cori cycle to kick in and clean up the ECF. Once lactic acid stops diffusing out, then that lactic acid just hangs out, binding to different proteins in the cell until the oxygen can clean it up with the oxygen debt. So again, this is why it may take a few days for the pain and the tiredness to go away after big exercise. If we have too much acids in the cell, we'll ship them out for management. If there's too much acids inside of the extracellular fluid, we'll actually ship them to the cells and let the cells deal with some of it. So they'll go back and forth. Typically, this is slow. right? When we think about it, it takes days sometimes for that lactic acid to dissipate and the muscle soreness to go away after big exercise. It wasn't instant. Okay? It takes a while for this to work. The only one that is quick is the hemoglobin buffer system. And again, it is a protein buffer because again, hemoglobin is a protein. So the carbon dioxide binds to the amine group, the amino acid component. So we can ship that carbon dioxide anywhere we need to drop it off at. So it is the only one that is a quick guy because it manipulates CO2 as the blood flows around in the body, dropping it off at the lungs or what have you. The carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system. This is named horribly. It's like naming a bald guy curly and a skinny guy chubby or a short guy,
No.
wasn't going to go for Mo, he's not sure. But again, whenever you have a fat guy named Tiny, that's not right. Okay? Same thing here. Even though it has the word carbonic acid in it, it doesn't do anything for carbonic acid. Okay? Now, the reason why it has that name in there is because we thought it did back in the day because this one's tied directly to breathing. So the more you breathe, the more this buffer system works. The less you breathe, the less this buffer system works. So of course we do see when we breathe, we get rid of carbon dioxide. So that's how the carbonic acid got tagged onto its name. But it doesn't actually manipulate carbon dioxide. That's the job of hemoglobin, to manipulate carbon dioxide. So it prevents changes in pH caused by organic acids and fixed acids. And again, this is why it can't buffer carbonic acid because carbonic acid is volatile. So it's the wrong buffer system for that wrong kind of acid. They're not going to work for each other. So what it basically does is the bicarbonate buffer system takes a fixed acid, takes an organic acid, and turns it into a volatile. So again, carbon dioxide is already volatile, so it does not work with this system. So most books, they're starting to drop off the carbonic acid part of the name and just call it the bicarbonate buffer system. Okay? I leave it there because it's still there in some books, so you don't get confused. Again, they're different things. So more important in the ECF, it's going to take hydrogens released by strong organic or fixed acids and turn them into a volatile acid so we can manipulate them easier and get rid of them easier. So it converts one of those others into volatile, so it can poof. Now limitation, again, it can't protect against changes in pH up or down because of CO2. It does not manipulate, does not manage CO2 levels. It only functions if the respiratory system is functioning. So if you stop breathing, it stops working. So if you hold your breath, this is why you start feeling lightheaded when you hold your breath. You're not only building up carbon dioxide, you're building up other acids that you're not able to convert and release. So the person has to be breathing in order for this system to be working. And it's limited by the amount of bicarbonate ions. If you run out of bicarbonate ions, obviously there's nobody there to buffer. And this is why after you have diarrhea, sometimes you lose too many bicarbonate ions, you feel really tired. So some people are like, man, I had diarrhea this weekend. I'm so exhausted. It's like, what did you do? All I did was poop. Why am I so tired? You're tired because if you didn't reclaim those bicarbs because you pooped them out too much, it affects your bicarbonate buffer system. And that tiredness is because you're too acidic. And you have to deal with the acidity, and it's going to take a while to clean up that mess, just like it takes a while to clean up lactic acid if you've exercised. So acidity levels can cause fatigue just in general because they affect how the body cells are working. So that's why you feel tired after having a bout of bad diarrhea, is because you lose all the bicarbs. You don't reclaim them like you're supposed to. One of the risks of having diarrhea, it causes acidosis and dehydration. It just ruins your day. Phosphate buffers, it uses phosphates. It works in the ICF instead of the ECF. So protein everywhere, ECF and ICF. Our bicarbonate buffers, ECF only. Our phosphate buffers, ICS only. And they also work in the urine, but that's still not considered ECF. So it's similar to the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffers, except we're using a slightly different route to do that. So it's also going to convert those fixed or organic acids into volatile acids so we can manipulate them more efficiently. So of course, once we've released these, we've got to buffer those excess hydrogens so we can bind them and reduce the pH changes that might be happening so we don't get too acidic, too basic. So again, those buffers are going to pick up those acids, tie them up, usually with the water molecule, because we like doing that kind of stuff. And we drop them off at 2 locations. We drop them off at the lungs, and we drop them off at the kidneys. So every time we breathe out, we get rid of carbon dioxide, a little bit of water. Every time we urinate, we get rid of any of those fixed or organic acids that we weren't able to poof and go away. So of course, if the lungs ain't working, the kidneys ain't working, your pH is going to go off. Which is why, again, when you're in the hospital, they are usually looking at the big 3 systems: cardiovascular system, respiratory, and urinary. They always want to know what your breathing rates are. They always want to know what your urination rates are and your heart rates, okay? Because you got to move those buffers either to the respiratory drop-off or the kidney drop-off. So those are the 3 that will take you out, because those are the ones that are crucial in managing acid-base balances in your body. So once the hydrogen is in the system, we got to get rid of it. And of course, how we're circulating what's going on can control if we get rid of it at the lungs or we're going to get rid of the kidneys and the rates. Okay? And of course, we can make more buffers with the kidneys to help buffer a little bit better. Okay. So respiratory compensation, this is controlling breathing rates to raise or lower blood pressure, or not blood pressure, excuse me, raise or lower pH. This is why when you're on a mechanical respirator, they really have to pay attention to the rate that they put you on, because if it's too much or too little, it can not only affect your oxygen levels, it affects your CO2 levels, thus affecting your pH within your system. And of course, renal compensation, we got to get rid of hydrogens, we get rid of carbon dioxide, and we can produce and reclaim buffers. So if your kidneys aren't working right, that could also cause acidity, pH level problems in your body. So we'll stall here. We'll continue tomorrow. It'll be super exciting. We'll have a disturbance in the boards. Not really. It'll be a disturbance in the acid-base balances. Let's go to lab and have a quiz about kidneys. Maybe it won't be so scary since we've had test 4, but then again, I've seen test 4. You need light?